man who truly governs a country was not elected by the people, but chosen as the guardian of divine law. When we hear the word Ayatollah, we often think of Iran, of religious authority and political tension. But behind that title lies a story that began over 14 centuries ago, with a succession crisis that divided a civilization and reshaped the Islamic world forever. Today, we What if the man who truly governs a country was not elected by the people, but chosen as the guardian of divine law? When we hear the word Ayatollah, we often think of Iran, of religious authority and political tension. But behind that title lies a story that began over 14 centuries ago, with a succession crisis that divided a civilization and reshaped the Islamic world forever. Today, we uncover how theology became government and how a religious scholar came to stand above presidents and parliaments. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Talk History. After that, leave a comment and tell us which other passionate topics you would like to hear about. All right, let's go all the way to the end. What happens when the most influential man in a civilization dies and leaves no clear political blueprint behind? In the year 632, the Arabian Peninsula stood at a turning point. Muhammad had united tribes that had warred for generations. He had transformed scattered communities into a powerful religious and political force. But when he died, something unsettling lingered in the air. Not doubt about faith, but uncertainty about leadership. Who would guide the community now? There was no universally accepted instruction, no formal succession plan, no designated political heir in a system still defining itself. Very quickly, two visions emerged. One group believed leadership should be chosen through consultation among respected members of the community. The argument was practical. The Muslim community needed stability, and consensus among its leaders would ensure continuity. From this perspective, the first caliph, meaning successor, became Abu Bakr, a close companion and father-in-law of Muhammad. But another group saw the matter very differently. For them, leadership was not merely administrative, it was sacred. They believed authority should remain within the Prophet's closest family, specifically through Ali, his cousin and son-in-law, married to Fatima, Muhammad's daughter. In their view, spiritual and political legitimacy were inseparable. This was not just a disagreement over governance, it was a disagreement over divine intention. Those who supported Ali became known as the Party of Ali, in Arabic, Shi'at Ali. Over time, that name would evolve into Shiite. Those who supported the first caliphs would form what later became known as Sunni Islam. At the time, no one could have predicted the scale of what had begun. What started as a dispute over succession slowly hardened into theological difference, legal divergence, and eventually geopolitical identity. Empires would rise under these banners, wars would be fought, communities would define themselves not only by shared faith, but by whom they believed had the right to lead after the Prophet. Today, Sunnis represent the majority of Muslims worldwide. Shiites are a minority, roughly 15%, yet they form majorities in countries such as Iran and Iraq, and significant communities in Lebanon, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and beyond. But for Shiites, the story of leadership did not end with Ali. In fact, for them, it was only just beginning. Because if leadership was divinely designated, then it could not simply pass through political negotiation. It had to follow a sacred lineage. And that belief would give birth to one of the most powerful theological concepts in Islamic history, the Imams. What if your rightful leader never died, but vanished? For Shiite Muslims, leadership after Ali was not merely political succession, it was a sacred chain. Ali was not just a respected companion of the Prophet, he was seen as the first Imam, not simply a ruler, but a divinely guided authority. A figure believed to possess special knowledge, the ability to interpret the Quran flawlessly and apply divine guidance to any moment in history. The word Imam in this context carries extraordinary weight. An Imam, in Shiite theology, is not elected. He is not chosen by consensus. He is designated by divine will, transmitted through lineage, from Ali and Fatima to their descendants. But here, history grows more complex. Not all Shiites agreed on how many legitimate Imams existed. Over time, different branches emerged, each recognizing a different line of succession, yet one branch would eventually become dominant, the Twelvers. Nearly 90% of Shiites today follow Twelver Shiism, and their defining belief centers around a mystery. According to Twelver doctrine, there were 12 legitimate Imams, descending from Ali. The 12th, Muhammad al-Mahdi, was born in the 9th century. But unlike the others, he did not die publicly. He disappeared. Shiite tradition describes two phases of occultation. In the first, known as the minor occultation, he was hidden but communicated through appointed representatives. Then, around the early 10th century, communication ceased entirely. The major occultation began and continues to this day. For over 1,000 years, Twelver Shiites have believed their rightful Imam is alive, but concealed by divine will.
Please stop using ChatGPT and Canva like children's toys.
So what should I do then?
First, stop scrolling. Second, download Cursive. Third, use it for 15 minutes a day. And finally, you'll become a master of AI tools.
So this is how I became the most dangerous person in the room. One habit changed everything. I replaced social media with micro-learning. Now, instead of wasting time on social media, I spend 15 minutes a day actually learning how to use AI for writing, planning, brainstorming, the real work. That's it, just one skill a day. This is the 28-day AI challenge built for beginners over 40.
He will return, they say, near the end of time. He will restore justice. He will guide the global Muslim community, the Ummah, through the final events of history. But until that day arrives, a profound question remains. Who leads? If the Imam is hidden, who interprets divine law? Who resolves disputes? Who speaks with authority? This theological vacuum did not weaken the community. It forced it to evolve. In the absence of the visible Imam, Shiite scholars, experts in Islamic jurisprudence, gradually assumed greater responsibility. They became interpreters of divine law, guardians of orthodoxy, guides for believers navigating everyday life. They did not claim to replace the Imam, but they acted in his shadow. And over centuries, from religious seminaries in cities like Najaf and Qom, a powerful clerical structure took shape. At its highest level, a new title would emerge, one that would carry enormous spiritual authority: Ayatollah. If the Imam cannot be seen, who dares to interpret God's will? The answer did not come overnight. It developed slowly across centuries of scholarship, debate, and religious refinement. In the seminaries of Najaf in Iraq and later Qom in Iran, generations of Shiite jurists devoted their lives to studying the Quran, the sayings of the Prophet, and the traditions attributed to the Imams. Out of this intellectual tradition emerged a hierarchy. At the top stood the most learned scholars, those whose mastery of Islamic jurisprudence granted them the authority to issue legal opinions, guide communities, and shape religious practice. Among them, a distinguished few earned a title that carried immense weight, Ayatollah, meaning sign of God. The term does not imply divinity, it signals recognition. It is an acknowledgement that this scholar's understanding of Islamic law and theology is so profound that others may follow his interpretations in matters of faith and daily life. But not all Ayatollahs hold equal standing. Some rise to even greater prominence and are recognized as Grand Ayatollahs, the highest-ranking authorities within Twelver Shi'ism. Believers may choose to follow one as their primary source of emulation, relying on his rulings to navigate everything from prayer and fasting to complex ethical dilemmas in modern society. This structure exists across the Shiite world. There are Ayatollahs in Iraq, Lebanon, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and anywhere significant Shiite communities thrive. In most cases, they function as religious authorities, influential, respected, sometimes politically vocal, but not formal rulers of the state. Their power is moral. Their influence flows through guidance, not government, except in one country. In Iran, the relationship between religious scholarship and political authority would take a radical turn. There, the idea that jurists could interpret divine law would evolve into something far more ambitious, the idea that they should govern. But to understand how Ayatollahs moved from seminaries to state power, we must step into the turbulence of the 20th century. Because before Iran became an Islamic republic, it was ruled by a monarch determined to modernize the nation by force, if necessary. And in the tension between modernization and religious identity, a revolution was quietly taking shape. In the early 20th century, Iran stood at a crossroads. The Qajar dynasty had faded, and a new ruler rose with a bold vision, Reza Shah Pahlavi. He believed Iran needed strength, industry, and secular institutions to survive in a rapidly modernizing world. Inspired by European models, he launched sweeping reforms. Religious schools were sidelined in favor of state-run education. Courts, independent of clerical authority, were established. Infrastructure expanded, the military was strengthened, Western-style dress was encouraged, and in some cases imposed. Then came one of the most controversial decisions. The veil, long worn by many Iranian women, was not merely discouraged, it was banned. Police were instructed to remove it from women in public. What some saw as liberation, others experienced as humiliation. Reform, in practice, was enforced from above. For supporters, this was progress. For critics, it was cultural erasure. When Reza Shah was replaced by his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the modernization project continued, accelerated even further. Land reforms, women's suffrage, industrial expansion, privatization. Iran grew wealthier. Tehran began to resemble a modern metropolis, but beneath the surface, dissatisfaction simmered. Some Iranians resented economic inequality. Others feared Western influence. Many religious leaders saw the monarchy's secular reforms as an attack on Islamic identity. Political repression compounded the tension. Opposition voices were monitored, silenced, or exiled. Among those exiled was a cleric whose name would become synonymous with revolution, Ruhollah Khomeini. Unlike other religious critics, Khomeini did not simply oppose the Shah's policies. He developed a theory, a bold reinterpretation of Shiite political thought. He asked a radical question: if the hidden imam is absent, who has the right to govern? For centuries, Shiite scholars had guided believers in religious matters, but Khomeini argued that guidance was not enough. In his view, Islamic jurists, the most qualified religious scholars, had both the authority and the obligation to rule politically in the imam's absence. He called this doctrine guardianship of the jurist. From exile in Turkey, then Iraq, and later France. His message spread through recordings, writings, and networks of supporters. His vision resonated not only with devout clerics, but also with students, workers, and political activists who saw in him a moral alternative to monarchy. By the late 1970s, protests filled the streets. Demonstrations turned violent, strikes paralyzed the economy. The Shah's grip weakened, and in 1979, the monarchy collapsed. But revolutions are rarely simple. The coalition that overthrew the Shah included liberals, secular nationalists, leftists, and religious forces. Yet once power shifted, one group proved more organized than the rest: the clerics. And at their head stood Ayatollah Khamenei, ready to transform religious authority into state power. When Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned to Iran in 1979, he did not arrive as a mere spiritual guide. He arrived with a doctrine ready to reshape an entire political system. For centuries, 12 Shiite scholars had accepted a delicate balance. The hidden imam was the rightful ruler. But
अगर आपको ये फ्रेम बिल्कुल 0 रुपए में चाहिए तो एकदम करेक्ट टाइम पे आए हो। हमारी होली सेल हमारे एस्टॉक के स्टोर के वेबसाइट पे लाइव हो गई है और उसमें हम ये जो 7 ऑर्सेस का फ्रेम है वो बिल्कुल आपको 0 रुपए में दे रहे हैं। क्यों? क्योंकि अगर आप ये जाके 7 ऑर्सेस का फ्रेम लेंगे तो आपको 100% कैशबैक मिलेगा। अभी होली सेल लाइव होने की वजह से आपको पता नहीं हो तो बता दूं, ये जो 7 ऑर्सेस का फ्रेम अगर आप इसको अपने घर पे रखेंगे तो आपको बता देता हूं, ये सूर्य के 7 घोड़ों को सिग्निफाई करता है। आपके लाइफ में फेम, पैसा, रिकॉग्निशन दौड़ा चला आएगा अगर आप इसको अपने घर पे रखना स्टार्ट कर देंगे। और इसके पीछे जो लगा है ना, ये जो आपको दिख रहा है वो पायराइट।
But until his return, clerics would guide believers in religious and legal matters, not govern nations. Political authority, even if imperfect, existed separately from ultimate divine legitimacy. Khomeini shattered that separation. His theory, known as guardianship of the jurist, argued that in the absence of the 12th Imam, the most qualified Islamic jurist must assume full political authority, not advisory authority, not moral influence, actual rule. Government, in his view, was not a secular mechanism. It was an extension of divine sovereignty. God had granted authority to the Prophet. The Prophet had transmitted it to the Imams, and in their absence, the guardianship fell upon the jurists trained in Islamic law. This was more than theology. It was a blueprint for power. After the Shah fled Iran, revolutionary forces formed a provisional government, but Khomeini moved swiftly. Through a national referendum, Iran was declared an Islamic republic. A new constitution was drafted and approved later that year, embedding the doctrine of guardianship of the jurist into the very foundation of the state. At the top of this new system stood a position unlike anything in modern republics: the supreme leader. The supreme leader was not elected by popular vote. He was chosen by an assembly of experts, a body composed exclusively of Shiite clerics, themselves elected by the public. Once appointed, the supreme leader would serve for life unless he resigned or was removed. Khomeini became the first to hold the office. His powers were sweeping. He commanded the armed forces. He appointed the head of the judiciary. He influenced the media. He shaped foreign policy. He could override decisions made by the president or parliament. And yet, Iran did not abandon elections. A president would still be chosen by popular vote. A parliament would still debate legislation. Citizens would cast ballots. But above these institutions stood the supreme leader, the jurist guardian of the state, operating as both theological authority and political overseer. When Khomeini died in 1989, another Ayatollah, Ali Khamenei, succeeded him. The structure remained intact. For the first time in modern history, the concept of Ayatollah was no longer confined to seminaries and legal opinions. It was institutionalized at the highest level of governance. In Iran, religious scholarship had become constitutional authority. But this raises an unavoidable question. If Iran holds elections and maintains republican institutions, can it truly be called a democracy, or is it something else entirely? At first glance, the Islamic Republic of Iran resembles many modern states. Citizens vote for a president. They elect members of parliament. Campaigns are held. Political debates take place. Ballots are counted. But the structure is layered. Above the elected president stands the supreme leader, the jurist entrusted with safeguarding the Islamic character of the state. And his authority is not symbolic. The supreme leader commands the armed forces. He appoints the head of the judiciary. He oversees national broadcasting. He sets the direction of foreign policy. He holds the power to dismiss high-ranking officials. And most significantly, he influences key institutions that shape the political process itself. One of these institutions is the Guardian Council. The Guardian Council reviews all legislation passed by Parliament. If a law contradicts either the Constitution or Islamic law, as interpreted by clerical authorities, it can be rejected. The Council also vets candidates running for office. Presidential hopefuls must be approved before they are even allowed to appear on the ballot. In other words, elections exist, but within boundaries defined by religious oversight. Another critical body is the Assembly of Experts, composed of clerics elected by the people. This assembly holds the constitutional authority to appoint and theoretically remove the supreme leader. Yet its members must themselves pass approval processes influenced by the very system they oversee. The result is a political structure that blends elements of democracy with religious guardianship. Supporters argue that this model protects moral integrity and shields society from corruption or foreign influence. Critics contend that it restricts political pluralism and limits genuine democratic competition. Both views coexist inside and outside Iran. But beyond political theory, one reality is undeniable. Since 1979, Ayatollahs have not merely advised the state. One of them has stood at its summit. So what then is an Ayatollah? He is a scholar of Islamic jurisprudence within Twelver Shi'ism, a sign of God recognized for profound expertise in interpreting divine law. In most parts of the Shiite world, he guides believers in spiritual and legal matters. But in Iran, the concept evolved further. There, one Ayatollah became the supreme leader, the guardian of a system where theology and governance are intertwined. And perhaps the most fascinating tension remains unresolved. In a nation waiting for the return of a hidden imam, how permanent can earthly authority ever truly be? The story of the Ayatollah is not just a story about religion. It is a story about succession, legitimacy, power, and the enduring question of who has the right to rule. From the death of Muhammad in the 7th century to the revolution of 1979, a theological disagreement evolved into a constitutional reality. The concept of divinely guided leadership, once centered on a lineage of imams, transformed into a modern political doctrine. In Iran, that transformation reshaped an entire state. It reminds us that history does not separate belief from governance as neatly as modern textbooks often suggest. Ideas about divine authority can echo across centuries and eventually crystallize into institutions. Understanding the Ayatollah means understanding that for millions of people, politics is not merely pragmatic, it is sacred. And when power is rooted in faith, compromise becomes more complex and authority takes on a dimension that extends beyond the ballot box. Thank you for watching all the way to the end.